All right.
All right. Welcome everybody to the November Houston Java user group meeting. We're doing this in the middle of the month because next week is the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving. That just seemed like a terrible idea. Robyn Fuentes is my coworker, my colleague, and vice president of consulting at Improving. One of the voted the #1 best place to work in Houston. I'm pleased and happy and proud to work there myself, and have Robyn as a colleague. She's absolutely awesome. She also will. She's also the leader of the Trust Initiative here at Improving, because if you go to improving.com, the first thing you see is trust changes everything, and it really does. It's made a world of difference, and I can see it every single day. Robyn, please tell us all about how to not get stuck in a code base so we can enjoy our careers.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. Appreciate the kind words. It's absolutely a pleasure to be working with you as well. All right. So I do have to warn my style of presentation is probably very different than what you're familiar with in a Java user group. Hopefully it'll be interesting and engaging. At any point, if you have questions, if you want to interject, if you have personal experiences that you want to relate to or ask questions about, feel free. You can either raise your hand in Teams or just interrupt me, whatever fits your style. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to try this cool little standout presentation style when I'm inside the presentation.
You look great. It looks really good. Looks awesome.
Awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. As Jim mentioned, I am VP of Consulting at Improving. Love my job there. Love what I do. Have been kind of really devoted to who we are, and as you mentioned, part of the Trust Initiative and stuff, which has been really cool. At some point, if you want to ask me about it, I love talking about it. I could talk somebody's ear off about it, but I won't do that to you now. Christian developer, improver, lifelong learner. I have been in all of the tech stacks from Java, .NET, web, JavaScript, all over the place. And so this particular talk isn't necessarily going to be language specific, but will absolutely impact how we all show up in the day-to-day workplace. And without further ado, let's talk about where all this starts and why are we talking about this. Now, whether you are working on innovation or you're working on a rewrite or a new feature or greenfield or whatever you are doing, you got to start with an idea. And this is important because the idea is what drives elements of success. It drives the constraints that we end up working with inside of developing software, right? So for this talk and for this given presentation, our example project is we are going to draw a horse. Now, don't worry, I'm not actually going to ask you to draw. And this is kind of the idea the person has in head, this big idea. This horse is going to look magnificent, powerful, and beautiful. And we are going to get this drawn. Now, with any project, before you can actually get started on it, unless you're planning on doing it all by yourself, there comes some planning, right? You got to figure out how many resources you need, what the timeline's going to look like. Yes, you have to figure out how much is this going to cost. And then you got to get, a nice little contract signed with your boss saying, yes, this is green lighted. We can do this project. We are going to draw the most beautiful horse. And then once the contract is signed, you get going. It is all rainbows and butterflies and we are happy. Let's check that off our list. Now, unfortunately, as I believe we all know, this is not how the real world works. We run into problems. We run into roadblocks. Things are not what they expected to be. Our estimates were wrong. Things didn't turn out the way we wanted it to turn out. Maybe our pencils broke just one too many times. Who knows? It is not rainbows and butterflies. And so at that point, we are faced with what do we do with constraints? Now, with any software project, you might have seen this before, you are dealt with a constraint of time, money, and quality. Now, if you want it to be really fast, and cheap, right? You've given up cheap quality and you want high quality, right? So all right, so for example, it's either going to take a really long time, not be too expensive and high quality, or it's going to be really expensive and fast, high quality, or it's going to be really low quality, fast, and medium expensive, for example. Now, in this world and in the world where you just signed a contract for a certain amount of money, the thing that ends up happening in our world more than not is money gets locked down. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in a duke out. Time and quality are out to fight the battle of the project. Now, unfortunately, in the world of software development, time often equals money, and it's also the thing that is much more visible. If you're talking to the business and you're talking about code quality and the purpose for it, they might be able to wrap their head around a lot of like what you're talking about esoterically, but they don't see it. It's more of a long-term game versus a short-term game, which is a harder thing to sell. So unfortunately, what really ends up happening here is that gets locked as well. So when things go wrong, the thing that ends up dying is quality. Ouch. Ouch. Now, this is the response you generally get from the business, right? We planned for this, right? You estimated for this. Why can't we have both? And it honestly is a good question. Now, I really do want to know how many of you guys know where this reference is coming from? Anybody?
Must be a commercial.
It was a commercial. All right, I'm going to actually show you where this comes from because it's one of my favorite commercials of all time.
How do you decide between crunchy and soft tacos?
¿Por qué no los dos?
Old El Paso, hard and soft tacos.
All right. So, distraction averted. That is what we're talking about when we're talking about why not both. You're presented with two competing constraints. You want to be like, why can't we figure out a solution that does both? Now I'm going to get back to presenter mode really quickly. All right, so we're back here with why not both, right? And so this is a fair question. And then we're also again talking oftentimes to business, right? We're talking to people who aren't technologists, and so they don't really understand how much time is a reasonable amount of time for how much quality that you're sacrificing. And so the only thing they really know to do a lot of times is apply more and more pressure. Cynthia, you got a question?
I just wanted to point out that all I see behind you is improving. I think you're going through your slides, but I'm not actually seeing them behind you.
Hmm.
I see the
I'm
slides
seeing
fine.
them. Yeah.
Okay, I can navigate through them
Oh,
manually. I just
where?
if that was intentional or
Oh,
No, that's
interesting.
weird.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I can.
I see
I
the
would
why
be
not
able
both.
to. Yeah, no, I have a navigation option though. That's very peculiar.
sorry to interrupt.
No,
No,
not a
it's
problem.
okay. It must be a new Teams feature that was automatically pushed out.
Yeah, you might. They do this thing where they send out they'll beta test stuff with a random group of people. Let me know if there's
Tag
anything I
where
can
it.
do, whether it's getting you the slides or something to help with that. But if you can navigate the slides and see them, then you should be able to follow along.
And the
Yep.
numbers are looks like the numbers at the bottom as well.
Oh,
But,
there should be
wait.
a way for you to switch it because it has a sync to presenter button, which
Oh,
takes me
okay.
back to slide one.
It only allows me to sync to presenter back to this first page.
Here, let me see if I can stop presenting
So
and do a thing
proving
real
it's
quick.
You is all I see behind her.
All right, let's see if this will work.
All right.
Instead of, because I did this thing where I did this resume, and I wonder if there's a bug inside of that. All right, are you back on why not both side?
Not yet. Almost. There we are. Cynthia, can you see that okay? Is it why not both now?
I see what I saw before, so I see a problem on my side.
Yikes, wow, okay.
That's unfortunate. Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so we're in the situation, right, where things have come up, things are taking more time than we initially planned. Business isn't quite understanding, and they look at us and they're like, can you do both? And a lot of times the developer and myself, if it's me in the role, I want to be able to do both, right? And I fundamentally believe that that is everybody's intent. And so we go and we're like, we're going to try our hardest. Now, the unfortunate result of that is you end up with the start of the project going great. And then things start getting a little bit worse. You start realizing there's more of a crunch for time. You start cutting more and more corners, start cutting features, you start cutting stuff. And all of a sudden, by the time you're done, you only really have time to just barely tape the thing together and ship. Now, back to the kind of the abstract and the title of this talk. This is the situation by which developers get stuck, in my opinion, where whoever duct taped that thing together knows that there is a single thread that if you pull that thread, the entire thing is going to fall apart. And the developer, the business, the teams are like, we can't lose them. We can't lose that knowledge. Like, it doesn't matter how much you document it. It's just there's so much knowledge that this person has about how this thing got put together, and you end up stuck on this project forever. I was on a project one time where this was somebody, I kid you not, for 8 years, where we couldn't lose him. We still hadn't been able to rewrite that system, and we still needed his knowledge on that system. And so how can we avoid this? How can we create systems and tools by which this situation is avoided, even though it's inevitable that we run into situations that we have less time than we have originally planned, more things come up than we originally planned. You still need to get to something that is acceptable and doesn't get you stuck in the same role doing the same thing over and over again. So now we're going to talk about tools. And tool number one is going to be talking about understanding the big picture. Now, I don't care if you are the lowest level developer on the project or the team lead. This is important because we are the expert coming to the table. Now, what I mean by the big picture is going to be asking yourself questions like this. How long is the code supposed to live? Why would we ask this question? Well, if you're working in the startup world in particular, there are times that you just need to throw code together for it to live for a week so you can get through a proof of concept and get funding. Awesome. Throw the dirtiest code you could possibly make that works over the fence and let's go. Then there is, we need this to live for 20 years and be our point of sale system that we don't want to replace unless absolutely have to. Okay, let's spend some significant time making sure that this is something that'll last a long time and is easier to version maybe. What is the problem space well defined? This is going to have to do with who are the people that you're going to go to talk about things. Is this exploratory, or is somebody already figured out exactly what they need? That's gonna inform what kinds of questions you ask in the room of, hey, am I helping you explore, or am I implementing something you've already explored and I should assume you already have answers to things? Who will be using the system and why? Now, as technologists, we are going to know whether something is low-hanging fruit for us and high value better than the user or the business is going to know. The only way we can identify that is if we understand the actual business need. Now, if they get a story, and this happens a lot, where they're like, hey, I have the solution, please implement the solution. And you look at that and you're like, okay, cool, yeah, I can implement that. Okay, well, what if we have just one quick iteration of why? Help me understand your experience and the purpose that you're using the system for. And then suddenly you go, dude, you know what? We can add this one button that makes all of these 5 steps into one seamless process. And they're like, really? Is that going to take a long time? It's like, no, that's like a 3-hour task. And it's those things that become super powerful, right? And it also can help a significant amount of time down the road. Then there's like, what happens if the system goes down? This plays into architecture decisions, right? If the system goes down and really nobody cares about it for a while, and it's like, okay, if it takes a while for it to come back up, cool. That's going to change like your resiliency and the types of failure tolerance that you're going to have to do and the time you spend on it, right? Versus hey, if this goes down, we're going to lose millions of dollars per second.
I don't know if you know, Waffle House is pretty much the only restaurant that can operate in situations where there's no power.
True fact. Actually, there are real hurricane centers, like cities will use whether or not Waffle House is closed as a metric to whether how bad the natural disaster is, because they're so good at this. Another fun fact, yeah, seriously. Another fun fact is, have you guys ever heard about the guerrilla warfare? What do they call it? The chaos monkey that Netflix came up with, because they knew going down was going to be a problem for their subscriptions, right? Then they created what they called the chaos gorilla, which was basically a chaos monkey on crack. And the fun fact is, when they released that, they actually made a mistake, and it got released outside of their own network, which actually made Amazon and several other things go down. But fun fact, Netflix didn't, because they were ready for it. But that's exactly it. As they went through these things of, okay, to what level are we talking about this? Right, accidentally. And then what are the skills needed that I don't have? Right? What training do I need? Who do I need to call when I don't know what I'm doing here? How am I going to get prepared for that? Who else do I need to get on my team to make this happen successfully? And last but absolutely not least, what tools do you need? Now, all of this is it's like when you're getting ready to work out and you're doing a warm up. That's how I see these questions when starting a project. Because if you don't understand these things, yeah, you might be able to finish the thing that you've been asked to do, but it might not come close to how good it could be. And it could really change the game sometimes just by asking some good questions. Comments or thoughts about this? All right, tool number 1. And I've got more questions to ask and ways to dig into this if at any point you're interested in continuing that conversation.
I do actually have a comment. So I've a lot of times worked with people that don't know the answers and they haven't been able to ferret those out. So it's really frustrating when you ask the good questions and you can't get the answers and you start down that road, and then, 3 months later, you're told that the constraints that you were originally given are wrong, and now, you've built something that you thought was the right thing, but now it isn't, and you have to go back and redesign. And it's not really your fault because you asked the questions and you even documented it. But I mean, how do you get buy-in from higher ups, or how do you force that conversation to go to a higher level where, somebody can actually make an informed decision?
There's several ways to tackle that, but I think that plays heavily into that, like, is the problem space well defined? Because even though somebody in the organization might not know, if your team doesn't know, I would say it's not well defined to the team. And so my general approach in that type of a situation would be, if I'm asking, say, the team, like, hey, why are asking these good questions? And they don't have the answer, like, cool, do you know who we could ask? And they're like, they don't have time. And I'll be like, well, okay, what I tend to do is I say, I look for opportunities by which having the answer to that would impact that decision. And I use those as a source of, like, kind of a pressure to the leadership team to give us those answers. So I'll be like, hey, I don't know how to go from we either pick A or B because we don't know the answer to this thing. And so if you're using Agile or those types of things, I heavily will lean on blocked statuses and those types of things early on to be like, we need the answer to this because this could be make or break 6 months down the road. And sometimes organizations like going to just look at you and be like, just go. And sometimes the answer to that is like, say, okay, document it and keep going. And that's a little unfortunate. But the idea, or the thing I try to do, is I try to like chip at it slowly throughout the project to make it as least impactful as possible. But yeah, not always a perfect answer, unfortunately.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. The second one, perfection is the enemy of done. Leave polish to the end. Now, this one I believe to be one of the most important tools in the terms of the context of this talk. And so what I mean by that, do now, you're going to identify your domains and your models and make sure that the areas of segregation, responsibility, integration, all of that is figured out. Identify major hurdles. That's going to go back to that question about what skills am I missing? Because a major hurdle could be, hey, we think we have an understanding how this is going to go, but none of us have actually done it. So we have no idea what we're going to run into. This happened recently with trying to integrate with the Graph API from Microsoft. Where we're like, hey, it looks simple. The documentation is pretty clear. And oh my goodness, it was not as simple as we thought it was with the things we were trying to do with it. Set baseline architectures, and that includes your testing architectures. How are you going to do an in-memory database? How are you going to do database updates? Where, like, what is this going to live in? Is it going to be in the cloud? Like, all of those questions being answered, and then also setting coding standards, especially if you're working in a team, because this is going to inform pull request reviews and all of the pieces of the things that you are not going to sacrifice as quality keeps going, to keep yourself stranded on an island. And then the do later, and the do later is still very, very important. First and foremost, solve every single edge case the code will ever handle. Extensibility, right, is a big thing to code for, but not solving every problem. Because it is very valuable to have a good enough understanding of like kind of what the edge cases are, but trying to code for all of them will result in a situation where you pre-code, and then when somebody comes in to actually implement it, don't understand your code and they code it again, and those things live together but not together, and you end up with this weird code situation. And so only code for the thing that you're building now, even though it's not the whole solution that you're going to be doing. And then make sure it's extensible and keep going that direction. Next, work on the fun parts that are lower in priority. I am so guilty of this one. I get excited about something. I get excited about new technology. I get excited about a new architectural pattern. I get excited about something, and I just go nuts. And then I realize, I look up, and I've spent 6 hours on it, and I'm like, oh, this is not as important as like the next 5 stories in my backlog. I should probably work on those. But that's damaging, right? Because that's how that horse drawing happened. They spent some time on the tail, and they got all the details of the tail before they had the base structure of the rest of the horse. And do not refactor for the 15th time. Now, red-green refactor is beautiful thing, and I highly recommend it when it comes to TDD. I'm not saying don't refactor at all. I am saying know when to stop refactoring. Because it does not need to be beautiful. It needs to be reasonably readable, do the thing it needs to do. But stop refactoring. Generally, if you're getting to refactor number 4, you've probably gone too far. 3 is probably even a little far, depending on the situation. Now, what I mean by that is essentially the same as if you're trying to draw a horse. Back to our project. You have to get the base frame up first. This is going to be the base architecture. Then you have to figure out how those pieces are going to fit together, your integration patterns, your contracts, right? And then you start filling it in, and then you add the detail. You add the pretty pieces. You add the nice to haves. You add all of those pieces after. Now, if you think about your projects in this sense, and if at any point in time you're like, I'm adding and finishing this piece, and I'm about to work on the next chunk, stop and think about this horse. How important is that next chunk versus the details you're adding to this? That makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like you could possibly hear some people say, well, but that's big design up front.
You could. And so this is not to be taken to an extreme, right? I don't want you to take the whole system and be like, all right, I have to know all of the domains and start them all at once. But you want to set up your baseline. So again, that is your baseline architecture, knowing what your domains are going to be and having just like the empty domain sitting there. Base architecture, testing structure, those types of things are what we're referring to there, right? Because at some point you do get to go in and fill in, the face of the horse and the hair and all of that stuff, right? Make sense? All right, next, unit test, unit test, unit test, and make them readable. I am a huge fan of TDD. It is a hard practice to get started on in general, and especially in brownfield. I hear this all the time where, I would love to do TDD. I do it in greenfield applications. I can't apply it to brownfield. I will counter that with find ways to abstract your new code so that you can test at least the new code in a brownfield, and at least get started on it, because this is so incredibly valuable. There is no possible way to get to the tail, finish the tail, go to the head, and not break the tail at least 5 times without TDD. So if you're not doing it today, there are tons of classes out there, whether you're on Udemy or Pluralsight. I know a colleague of mine, Claudio, does a lot of classes on this. Highly encourage that as a career rocket when it comes to software development. Now, what do I mean by readable? There are lots of different levels that you can take readable tests. But the thing that I believe is the most important is that every single one of your business acceptance criteria makes it into a readable format like this. Now, that is a pretty high bar, but I believe it is achievable and valuable because at that point, you know that all of your acceptance criteria that have ever been in the project are well documented and the next developer can understand why things are built the way that they're built. Now, you could take this one step further and you can create a test suite with abstracting out all of the mocks, all of the implementation, all of that, and actually create Gergen style, like given when then test code that reads like English inside the actual test, which I believe is a beautiful style set of tests. If you're curious about that, that is a different conversation. Would love to have that. But this, I believe, is the minimum bar. That means we are not creating test names that say, when I do this, it is successful. Because what does successful mean? And then it also means we don't need to creating a test for the implementation, right? I don't need to know that every single method, has a null check necessarily in my test. Maybe that was a bug and you want to add a test for that because there was an acceptance criteria about this thing shouldn't error, but that's not about the null check, that's about the error. That makes sense? I am still a fan of happy path and sad path testing, but as a bare minimum, this will make or break your project in lots of different ways. Questions, comments? All right.
Vigorously agree.
All right, next, and one of the harder ones to know when to do, to know when to deviate from the plan. And so what I mean by this is when you run into a situation where something is bigger, harder, more complex than you had originally planned it to be, my rule of thumb is, and this shouldn't take a lot of time, is identify a plan B first. Second, time box the amount of time it takes to solve for plan A. And if your time box expires, move on. Plan B it is. That then becomes a tech debt item that goes to the backlog again and gets reprioritized based on how valuable that is compared to everything else, which oftentimes sends it almost down to the bottom of the deck. So I gave you that example earlier, right, of the Microsoft Graph API that we were trying to hit, and there's a huge problem. We had a backup plan for that. Now, a little bit of a story time here. We're trying to get it to work where we, logged in via the Azure portal, got the token sent over, got the services to log in, got who the user is, got what their roles were assigned, and who reports to them from Azure. Now, we just could not, we got it to work locally, and we got a POC working, and it was all good, but for some reason, it just was not working in a deployed environment. We figured out there were some configurations issues in Angular, there was some other stuff going on, but still could not figure it out. We punted. We time boxed it, we hit the time box, and we punted. Now, in the process of punting, we were reverting out some stuff, and I got on a call, and somebody was confused about something, and it brought us to finding the actual answer of what the problem was. We actually got all the way back to plan A and implemented it, and it worked just fine. But that's not common. And so be comfortable with not going with plan A, whether that's the tool you've chosen, whether that is, hey, maybe we have to talk to the business and change the feature of this a little bit so that we can get it done. That is a healthy conversation to have, and one I think that most technologists should feel empowered to have. Questions? All right.
Know your fire exits, basically.
Right. All right. This one I also believe is extremely important. Start deploying to production now. I don't care if you are building a brand new greenfield application and all you've got is hello world. Create your production environment. in an agile world, there are going to be tons of things that change as you're progressing through, and without fail, this will happen. We've all seen it. It works on my machine, right? Now, in a world where you have been working on a project for 6 months, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, God forbid, and you still haven't deployed it to production, you are putting yourself in a position where you're looking for a needle in that haystack. I lost my hand. That's the one over there. So you see the dude on top? That's for scale. It's huge. You're gonna spend forever trying to find where the needle is. Versus you got this bitty little change set, and you got to figure out where the needle is in that. Get your stuff to production immediately. If you are in a brownfield where they've been working on it for a while, start deploying pieces to production. Find a way to get out there. Get your QA in that environment testing if that's all they're doing. Get one user. I don't care. It's vital because this isn't fun. And this is what creates those like, hey, we're ready to go to production and we're going to release and have users in 2 weeks. Just kidding. That's 8 months later. We don't want to be that.
Code not deployed is value not delivered.
Right. And here's where we end up, right? Instead of being that beautiful, magnificent horse, we end up with this horse. Now, what I really like about this analogy in particular is if you remember that horse at the beginning was really, really well defined horse with a shadow. Now, what we ended at is a horse, but he's got a backdrop, he's got a fence, he's got a context, he's got all these things that maybe ended up being more valuable to the user than the detail into the horse. But it has all the necessary pieces. And guess what? Somebody else can come behind you and maintain this without you getting stuck. And that's really it, y'all. The concepts are pretty high level. And I'll say that most, if not all of them, are easier said than done. But that's really all I have for you. Questions? Comments? Experience they want to share in this space?
These slides are available, are they? Right?
I can send them out.
Okay, great. Because you've condensed things in a really convenient way. I'd like to have access to that.
Sure. No problem.
I'll post this on YouTube pretty soon here, Scott.
So one of the hardest thing I think, as Robyn said, is when you realize you've got constraints, actually being transparent and going to your stakeholders early with something as early as you can, rather than waiting a week before you deploy and says, oh, by the way, we're not getting XYZ out, because they may have had the time to reprioritize stuff for you.
Yeah,
It's been my experience.
Absolutely. I mean, transparency is huge with the business. There's still like this kind of divide between technology and business, and a lot of that divide comes from a lack of understanding of the other world. And so that plays into, and thank you, Dan, for the comment. That plays into why understanding the business world it plays into trust. Really, is where that comes down to. Now, as Jim mentioned, I'm the trust initiative champion. I'll talk about trust all day long, but it's so important in this world because as soon as the business feels like, no, they're actually trying to build this thing, they're actually trying to create value. They're not just trying to get my paycheck or get a paycheck from me. The entire dynamic changes. And it doesn't become this like, I'm going to push you as hard as I can to get as much as I can. It's going to be, we're going to collaborate on creating a good solution with resources we have, which is a cool transition to go through.
That's where I think something like extreme programming would work really well, because they advocate sitting with the customer, working with the customer right next to you as one of the things that you do as an extreme programming practice.
Yeah, it's crazy valuable. And then like you talk about UX practices of actually getting users to test the system and all of that. I mean, it all plays off of some of these same principles. But I think that the roles that we play are just slightly different. in that.
I think what you said about trust is really important. It gives you the credibility to be able to come back again on another future project or another situation where you find something is not right, or you're able to save time maybe, and you can convey what you need to, and people will actually believe you, as opposed to yeah, whatever. I mean, I feel like that's really valuable for not only the business to get that feedback early, but also for the developers, because we don't want to be unsuccessful. We don't want to be the ones that let the project down. And that's kind of how we feel when things don't work out. But the business wants to prioritize things in a way that they get the best value out of what you're doing.
100%. 100%. It changes the game entirely. Any other thoughts? Anybody had like an experience where one of these has gone really well or gone really poorly? That has made an impact on their project?
Working on a fairly large brownfield project that I've been working hard to introduce these sorts of practices, and the product owners have decided to just rewrite it from scratch. And they've spent a year and a half determining what technologies they're going to use for the front end and the back end and the database and all that, while I've maintained the legacy system. And it occurred to me that this was written by a self-taught developer who was prolific over 25 years. And you're not going to get a team of 5 people to rewrite it in just a couple of years. This is going to take a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm working hard to make it maintainable, adding unit testing capabilities to a system that was not designed with test in mind.
Yeah.
So
that can be very hard.
It's hard. It takes a lot of time, but yeah, you're right. If I don't do that, then that's all I get to do.
Yeah. And I mean, the same goes for the guy that worked there for 25 years. Like, that was his job security. And there are developers in this world, and I don't say this with judgment. There are developers in the world where they're happy with that. They just want to have a job, come in, do their code, and leave. And job security is a great thing. Awesome. Well, how do we have those conversations about, hey, you can do that, and also create it so that the owners of this code don't end up with an entire rewrite that's going to take a lot more than you'd expect it would in time and effort and money.
Right. Well,
that's one
he
of the
retired,
hard.
so he got out of it.
Yeah. There's actually a project I did with Dan Fine where we were working on a project that had been incrementally built over multiple years by one person. And it was the same deal where there was a terror in the business of losing this guy because he was the one that understood it all. And that turned out to be like we kept him around to kind of consult the new project and to help us revamp it while we re-architect and whatnot. And it was amazing just how eye-opening it is, how these little like, hey, I know this like little place in the code that does this one little thing over here. Fun fact. And you're like, oh, that one could have been broken so easily.
It's pretty frightening.
It's so much more common than you would think.
I also think that some developers like to perpetuate that myth that nobody else can support it but me. But I found out on a number of occasions that once Captain Essential left, holy cow, this isn't that hard to do if we stop doing it his way.
That's an unfortunate truth, right? And that's the thing you want to kind of try to debunk is if you want to do the exact same code every day for a long time, yeah, it'll be great job security, but you're not going to work on the new technologies. You're not going to work on the new fun stuff, the new innovative project, the whatever. You'll get stuck right where you're at, and that doesn't sound fun to me. I don't know if it sounds fun to you guys, but not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that is honestly true of that fear that the business has, let that person go. I've had that unfortunate conversation of, if you walk in and there's a single superhero, fire the superhero. You'll be amazed what the team can accomplish.
Yeah.
I was trapped at a place for a little while where the superhero was actually a real jerk, and he talked to the managers very disrespectfully, and there were a lot of people that worked there that felt, like I said, trapped because that one guy, even though he was not a manager, he was not an upper level, but he basically had the keys to the kingdom, and he managed the database and had some programming responsibilities, and he would shout at the managers and VPs, and that, to me, that signaled you need to get out of here. And there were a lot of people that did exactly that because it was mismanagement up to the highest level. You can't let one person dictate the whole shebang, and that's an unfortunate situation, but it happens.
It does. That's unfortunate. Yeah, it's unfortunate those situations even exist. There's also situations where people will keep the code completely on their own machine, right? Where if you fire them, you literally lose the code. And so that's another one going back to the start. So even as being on the team or being a management of the team, those summary questions of, where does this code live? What is the architecture? Like, what's going on? Eliminate some of those risk factors of people who can snipe or steal, per se, the project.
Can you do laundry?
Hey, Srini, welcome.
Yeah. Actually, Robert, that's why I'm a big fan of commit often. Try at least before I leave for the day, make sure I got everything up there because, God forbid something happens, then, the code's there.
Yeah, I think Cynthia posted the bus factor, right? You don't want to be a bus factor, even if it's a single day's worth of stuff. Things I tell people that are on our teams is commit every day. Even if you're not done, make sure you commit before you leave. But maybe
Multiple
don't push, but yeah, multiple times a
you
day
have to
ideally.
push too. Yeah.
Well, push to your branch, but don't merge and leave. That kind of
right.
stuff.
Yeah. I committed. I did my thing. See ya.
It gives you that freedom, though. I mean, SVN wasn't like that. I can remember back to VS early days where Microsoft's, terrible. I can't even remember what it was called. What was the
Team Foundation server?
Team Foundation. There it is.
It was just awful, and the merges were just terrible, and you just were like, oh God, I hope this doesn't break anything. Pray. And now we have like our own branches, and we can do whatever we need to do, and it's great. I mean, I feel successul.
Right. It's wonderful.
Yay.
I had a job where we were using TFS, right? And so they only gave a certain level of people commit rights. So as a more junior developer, you had to make all your changes and then shelve it. And we had to use the special shelving naming system to be able to identify that this is the change set, that's the real change set. We actually want it to be merged. And then submit the ticket to the manager of the code review. And whether it's a day later or a week later, is now merging it into the code base. And it was problematic, to say the least. Git's wonderful. I love Git.
An interesting story I heard recently was that Linus Torvalds who wrote Linux, he also wrote Git. And until Git became popular, he questioned whether or not he had ever done anything useful with his software life.
Well, he definitely did.
Even if he can feel like he's got imposter syndrome, it's okay.
Somebody asked why he named the Git, and he said, "Well, I like to name things after myself." One, Linux for Linus, and I'm a Git, so I named it Git.
Oh, man.
I'm actually reading the book that he wrote about his story of creating Linux. If you're curious about how it came to be, it's called Just for Fun. So got it for $3 at Half Price Books.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cheap books for the win.
Yes, definitely. A good book. It's a good book too. He did a good job writing it. How I found the time to write it, I don't know, but it's pretty good.
Awesome.
So I'll go ahead and I can stop recording here. Just so we can talk a little more freely. But these are all really good stories.
They're great stories.
Cool. All right. If you watch from YouTube, thanks for joining us. See you at the next Java User Group meeting. Check out www.hjug.org and follow, or if you want to, we've got a Google group and LinkedIn group and Facebook group too. So thanks so much. See you next time.
Hey, Jim, real quick question before you drop.